Her name is Amara. She is 34 years old. Good job, nice apartment, people who love her. Every reason, by the world's measure, to be fine. She is sitting at her desk. She has been sitting at her desk for 2 hours. She has not started. Not because she doesn't want to. She desperately wants to. Not because she doesn't know what to do. She knows exactly what to do. Her brain just will not begin. Amara was diagnosed last year with ADHD, attention deficit/hyperactivity disorder, a condition that affects how the brain regulates attention, impulse control, and the ability to initiate and complete tasks. She was 34 years old, and it was the first time in her life she had a word for what she had been living with since childhood. In another family, in another country, there is a boy who cannot sit still, who loses his school books every week, who gets into trouble constantly, not because he is trying to, but because his brain moves faster than any instruction given to him. His family's explanation is not medical. They say he has a difficult, disobedient spirit, that he disrespects the family, that something is spiritually wrong. He is punished, he is prayed over, he is told over and over to try harder. Amara's doctor called it ADHD. This boy's family called it something else entirely. They were both looking at the same brain. Welcome to Mind and Heart Lab. Today we are unpacking ADHD, attention deficit/hyperactivity disorder, the way it should have been explained to all of us a long time ago. When most people hear ADHD, attention deficit/hyperactivity disorder, they picture a hyperactive child who cannot sit down, a boy bouncing off classroom walls. That picture missed millions of people. The DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, published by the American Psychiatric Association and used by clinicians worldwide, describes ADHD as a persistent pattern of inattention and or hyperactivity impulsivity that interferes with functioning and development. Not a phase, not a bad personality, a persistent neurological pattern. The DSM-5 recognizes 3 presentations of ADHD, predominantly inattentive, the type with no visible hyperactivity, the type most often missed, predominantly hyperactive impulsive, and combined, both together. The hyperactive child bouncing off walls? That is one presentation. The quiet woman who daydreams through every meeting? That is also ADHD. The man who cannot stop procrastinating but can focus on a video game for 10 hours straight? That is also ADHD. One condition, many faces, most of them never diagnosed. So what is happening in the brain of a person with ADHD? This is where the story changes from moral failure to neuroscience. The brain has a system called the executive function network. Think of it as the brain's project manager. It decides what to prioritize, when to start, how to sequence tasks, and how to regulate emotions under pressure. In the ADHD brain, this system is wired differently. The role of dopamine, a neurotransmitter, meaning a chemical messenger that helps brain cells communicate, is central here. Dopamine drives motivation, attention, and the sense of reward that tells your brain a task is worth continuing. In ADHD, the dopamine system functions differently. The brain does not get the same keep going signal that a neurotypical brain receives when working on a routine task. This explains something that confuses almost everyone who does not understand ADHD: the focus paradox. The ADHD brain cannot focus on command, but it can hyperfocus for hours, sometimes days, on something it finds genuinely interesting. Not because the person is choosing what to care about, because the brain's dopamine system responds powerfully to novelty, urgency, and genuine interest, and barely responds to routine obligation. This is why people with undiagnosed ADHD spend their lives confused about themselves. They watch themselves fail at ordinary tasks everyone else managed easily. Then they watch themselves pour everything into the things they loved. They thought they were selfish, that it was a character flaw. It was not a character flaw, it was dopamine. The DSM-5 also clarified that ADHD is a neurodevelopmental condition, meaning it begins in childhood, even when it is only identified in adulthood. Symptoms must be present before the age of 12 and appear across multiple settings. ADHD does not appear only in difficult situations. It is present throughout a person's entire life. The DSM-5 outlines specific diagnostic criteria for ADHD. Let us walk through them, not as a self-diagnosis checklist, but as a window into what this condition looks like lived every day in a real human life. Inattentive symptoms include often failing to give close attention to detail, not because of carelessness, but because the brain moved on before the task finished. Difficulty sustaining attention on tasks that are not immediately stimulating. Seeming not to listen when spoken to directly, not because the person does not care, but because their mind was genuinely elsewhere. Not following through on instructions, not because of defiance, but because the instruction entered the working memory and something else replaced it before action was possible. Difficulty organizing tasks, avoiding tasks that require sustained mental effort, losing things constantly, keys, phones, important documents, being easily distracted by unrelated thoughts, forgetting daily activities that seem like they should be automatic. These are not small inconveniences. Over a lifetime, they accumulate into failed relationships, lost jobs, chronic shame, and a bone-deep belief that something is fundamentally wrong with you as a person. Hyperactivity and impulsivity symptoms include fidgeting, leaving a seat in situations where staying seated is expected, feeling internally restless, which in adults often has no visible physical expression but is constant and exhausting. Talking excessively, blurting answers out before questions are finished. Difficulty waiting. Interrupting, not out of rudeness, but because the thought will be gone if it is not said immediately. For diagnosis, the DSM-5 requires 5 or more symptoms from either the inattentive or hyperactive impulsive list for adults aged 17 and older, 6 or more for children up to 16. Symptoms must have been present for at least 6 months, appear in more than one setting, and cause real functional impairment in daily life. We are living through what researchers are calling a late diagnosis epidemic. Across the world, adults in their 30s, 40s, and 50s are receiving ADHD diagnoses they should have had decades earlier. The emotional response is remarkably consistent. It is grief, and it is relief at the same time. Grief for the years spent believing the wrong story about yourself, for the jobs that suffered, for the relationships damaged by symptoms that had no name. And relief, because there is a reason. The reason is real. It has a name. And a name means it can be addressed. Late diagnosis happens for 3 reasons that compound each other. First, the hyperactive child stereotype meant clinicians only looked for one presentation of ADHD and missed everyone who presented differently. Second, masking. The process by which people, particularly women and girls, and people from communities where seeking mental health support carries stigma, learn to hide their symptoms entirely. They build elaborate coping systems that make them appear to function. They are not functioning. They are exhausted. Third, ADHD presents differently across cultures. The DSM-5 acknowledges that cultural context must be considered in evaluating whether behavior is outside what is appropriate for a person's developmental context. In communities where a child's inattentive or impulsive behavior is explained through spiritual or moral frameworks rather than medical ones, no referral for clinical assessment is ever made. The child grows up. The ADHD continues. The diagnosis never comes. Research consistently shows that adults with undiagnosed or untreated ADHD face higher rates of job instability, financial difficulty, and relationship breakdown. Not because they are less capable, but because the systems of modern professional and personal life were built for a different brain. The DSM-5 notes that ADHD commonly co-occurs with, meaning appears alongside, anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, and learning disorders. Many people with ADHD are treated for their anxiety or depression for years without anyone identifying the ADHD that may be driving both. A co-occurring condition, sometimes called a comorbidity, is a second condition that exists alongside the primary diagnosis. Perhaps the most invisible cost is the internal one. A relationship with yourself shaped entirely by failure and confusion. A lifetime of comparing yourself to others and always falling short. That person was not broken. Their brain was never given the right conditions. Everything begins with an accurate diagnosis, a proper ADHD assessment, typically conducted by a psychiatrist, clinical psychologist, or trained specialist, involves a detailed clinical interview, a review of childhood history, standardized rating scales, and usually input from someone who knew you as a child. In many parts of the world, this is difficult to access. That difficulty is real. It is also worth navigating. For many people, medication is part of the support. Stimulant medications, the most commonly prescribed class, work by increasing the availability of dopamine in the brain, effectively giving the executive function system more of what it needs to work reliably. For people whose brains genuinely need this support, it can feel like being given a volume dial for the noise for the first time. An important note: medication is not right for everyone and is not the only option. Any decision about medication must be made with a qualified healthcare professional who knows your full history. CBT, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, adapted for ADHD, teaches practical executive function skills, how to break tasks into manageable steps, how to manage time, how to interrupt avoidance cycles. ADHD coaching, a separate discipline from therapy, works on the practical structures of daily life, systems for remembering, organizing, starting, finishing. Environmental design, structuring your physical and digital environment to do some of the executive function work your brain struggles to do consistently, is one of the most powerful and accessible tools available. Body doubling, working in the presence of another person, even virtually, is consistently effective. And community. The growing global community of people who were diagnosed late, often discovering each other online, has been genuinely therapeutic. Knowing that your experience is shared, that the story you told yourself about yourself was wrong, that millions of people lived inside that same wrong story. Amara still has ADHD, attention deficit/hyperactivity disorder. That has not changed. What changed is that she understands herself now. She uses timers. She works with a trusted system. She has medication that was chosen carefully with her doctor. She is part of an online community of late diagnosed women who check in on each other. She is not fixed. She is not cured. She is supported. And for the first time in 34 years, she is not fighting herself every single day. 5 things to carry with you from this episode. 1. ADHD, attention deficit/hyperactivity disorder, is a neurodevelopmental condition, not a character flaw, not a failure of willpower. 2. It affects approximately 5% of children and 2.5% of adults worldwide. Many have never been diagnosed. 3. There are 3 presentations: predominantly inattentive, predominantly hyperactive impulsive, and combined. Most adults diagnosed late have the inattentive type. 4. Late diagnosis brings grief first and relief second. Both are valid. Both are part of the same process of finally understanding yourself accurately. 5. With the right support, which may include diagnosis, medication, CBT, environmental structure, and community, people with ADHD stop fighting themselves and start working with who they actually are. If this video describes someone you know or someone you are, please share it. The conversation it might start is worth more than you know. Subscribe, because next month we are looking at ADHD in women and girls, the most misdiagnosis of our time, and that episode might change someone's life. I will see you then.